On the morning my grandson was about to graduate, my phone lit up with a message that cut deeper than any knife could. We're not sure there will be a seat for you. It might be better if you and George watched the ceremony online. Those words came from Marissa, my daughter-in-law. I read them twice, then a third time, hoping I had misunderstood, but the letters stayed there on the glowing screen, sharp and merciless. I sat at the kitchen table, my coffee untouched, watching the steam curl and vanish as if even the warmth wanted to escape me. My heart pounded so loudly that for a moment I thought George would hear it in the next room. I wish I could tell you I shrugged it off, but the truth is, those words pierced through every memory I had of holding Owen as a baby, of packing lunches when his parents were too busy, of staying up late to help him study. To be told there might not be a seat after all of that? It felt less like a suggestion and more like a final verdict, that my place in my own grandson's life had been reduced to a glitchy live stream on a computer screen. When George walked in, wiping his hands on a dish towel, I slid the phone across the table. He adjusted his glasses, squinting at the message. His jaw tightened, and the lines in his face seemed to deepen. "Unbelievable," he muttered. That was his way, short words, steady tone, but I knew what boiled underneath. George wasn't the kind of man to show anger easily, but when he did, it was because the wound was deep. I swallowed hard. Maybe we should just stay home. The moment the words left my mouth, I hated myself for them. I hated how small I sounded, how ready I was to shrink, to avoid conflict, to sit quietly in the background as I'd done so many times before. George looked at me like I had lost my mind. "Evelyn, we've been there for Owen every step of the way. If anyone has earned a seat at that graduation, it's us." I wanted to believe him, but Marissa's message had already planted doubt like a weed. I could almost hear her voice saying it, smooth, polite, with that condescending sweetness she used whenever she wanted to remind me that I was an extra, not part of the main cast. The resentment didn't come only from that message, it came from years of being chipped away at by little comments, little actions that told me exactly where I stood. Like the Thanksgiving when I baked 3 pies, and Marissa breezed in with 1 store-bought cake and everyone raved about her effort. Or the Christmas when I bought Owen a telescope he had been dreaming about, but she interrupted as he opened it to remind him that Santa really wanted him to focus on his college fund instead. It wasn't just what she said, it was how she said it. Always wrapped in silk, but with barbed wire underneath. And David, my own son, rarely stopped her. He would stand there with that nervous half-smile, like a man watching a storm from behind glass, relieved it wasn't pointed at him. I picked up my phone again, staring at the words until my chest ached. "Maybe it's true," I whispered. "Maybe Owen doesn't even want us there." George reached across the table and took my hand, his grip firm. "Don't you dare believe that. That boy loves you. You and I both know who was there for him when his parents were too busy climbing ladders and attending dinners." He was right, but still I felt the humiliation burn. Every sacrifice we had made, babysitting on short notice, paying tuition when scholarships fell short, even helping with rent when David and Marissa stretched themselves too thin, suddenly meant nothing in the face of one dismissive text. I thought of the nights Owen spent at our house when he was little, curled up on our old plaid couch with a blanket pulled to his chin, asking me to tell him stories about when his grandpa was young. I thought of the time George drove across town in the pouring rain to pick him up after practice because David forgot. I thought of the afternoons I spent quizzing him on spelling words, then cheering louder than anyone when he won the County B. And now we were being told to stay home. George stood and poured himself another cup of coffee. His movements were calm, deliberate, but his silence carried the weight of thunder. "What if we go," I said hesitantly, "and they make us sit in the back? What if Owen doesn't even notice us there?" George looked me in the eye, and for a moment I saw the younger man he used to be, the one who once worked 2 jobs to keep a roof over our heads, the one who had never once backed down when it came to protecting his family. "Then we'll sit in the back," he said firmly. "But we'll be there. Because that's what we've always done. We've shown up. And I'll be damned if I let them erase us from this chapter of his life." His words landed like a steadying hand on my shoulder. The shame I felt from Marissa's message didn't vanish, but it shifted. Instead of shrinking, I felt something stir inside me, something stubborn, something tired of being pushed aside. Still, the resentment lingered. Every time I tried to pack my bag, I thought of that text, of Marissa's tone that dripped with false concern. It might be better if you stayed home. Better for who? Better for her, certainly. Because the truth was, our presence reminded everyone of a reality she wanted to hide, that while she played the role of the perfect mother, much of the heavy lifting had been done by us. I remembered the first time she hinted we were overstepping. Owen was only 6, and he had fallen and scraped his knee while playing outside. I rushed to help him, bandaging the wound with the practiced hands of a mother who had raised her own children through every bump and bruise. Marissa stood in the doorway and said, "Oh, Evelyn, you really don't need to insert yourself every time. He has parents, you know." I smiled then, bit my tongue, but inside I burned. That was the beginning. From then on, every kindness we gave was twisted into an accusation. Too much, too present, too involved. Now, years later, it had culminated in this message: don't come. By the time evening fell, my decision was still shaky. George, though, was already ironing his shirt. "We're going," he said, as if it were that simple. I watched him, torn between admiration and fear. I admired his resolve, but I feared the humiliation. I imagined walking into that auditorium and seeing David look away, Marissa plastering on a tight smile, pretending she hadn't tried to keep us out. Would the audience see us as intruders? Would Owen feel embarrassed? But then another thought came. What if he looked for us and we weren't there? The image of his eyes scanning the crowd, searching for the grandparents who had always shown up, haunted me more than the fear of being sidelined. Later that night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. George was already asleep beside me, his breathing steady, but my mind was a storm. Every word Marissa had ever spoken echoed in the darkness. "You don't need to bring so many gifts. We'll handle it ourselves. Don't worry, Evelyn, we've got it covered." Always polite, always smiling, always cutting me down one careful inch at a time. But this time was different. This time, she hadn't just pushed me aside, she had tried to erase me entirely. And as much as it hurt, it also lit a fire. Because if there was one thing I knew about myself, it was this: I had given too much, loved too much, sacrificed too much to let anyone tell me I didn't belong in my grandson's story. By the time dawn crept through the curtains, I had made my choice. I rolled over, touched George's shoulder, and whispered, "We're going." His eyes opened slowly, and when he smiled, it wasn't just relief, it was pride. "We'll go together," he said, "like we always have." And just like that, the doubt shifted into resolve. The resentment didn't vanish, but it sharpened into purpose. If Marissa wanted me invisible, then my very presence at that graduation would be my quiet act of defiance. Not loud, not dramatic, just undeniable. I would be there, and Owen would see me. We left just after sunrise. George loaded the bags into the trunk, his movements steady and quiet, while I stood on the porch with my sweater pulled tight around me. The neighborhood was still asleep, blinds drawn, front lawns heavy with dew. I should have felt proud, heading to my grandson's graduation, but all I felt was a knot in my chest. The drive was 3 hours, long enough for thoughts to circle in my head like vultures. I kept seeing Marissa's message, those words that seemed harmless on the surface, but cut me down every time I read them. "There may not be a seat for you." 3 hours to replay the look on David's face whenever Marissa spoke for him. 3 hours to wonder if Owen even knew what had been said about us. I tried to distract myself by watching the fields roll by. The crops were already tall, the green broken only by the occasional barn. Normally, I liked long drives. They gave me peace. But that morning, every mile felt heavy. We stopped for gas just outside of town. George went inside to pay while I sat in the car, watching people move about as if the world were perfectly ordinary. A young mother buckled her toddler into a car seat. A man in a work uniform grabbed a cup of coffee. Everyone seemed to belong somewhere. When George came back, he handed me a bottle of water. "You need to drink something," he said simply. I took it, but my throat was tight. "Do you think we're making a mistake?" I asked quietly. "No," he said without hesitation. "The mistake would be staying home." I nodded, though I wasn't convinced. I had been pushed aside so many times that I had started to believe maybe that was where I belonged, out of the way, quiet, convenient only when needed. We drove on, and I thought about Owen. He was the real reason I couldn't just stay home. He had been a gentle boy, always looking for someone to cheer for him. And we had been those people. When his parents forgot about his school play, George and I were the ones in the front row, clapping until our hands hurt. When he wanted to try baseball, but David said it was a waste of time, George found an old glove at a thrift store and practiced with him in the backyard until dusk. I remembered sitting at our kitchen table, flashcards spread out, helping him learn multiplication while Marissa talked about how tired she was from work. I remembered how his face lit up whenever he came running through our door, backpack bouncing on his shoulders, asking, "Grandma, what's for dinner?" Those weren't small moments. They were a life. They were the reason he had made it this far. And yet, in Marissa's message, all of that vanished as if it never happened. By late morning, we pulled into a small diner on the side of the highway. The sign outside read Maggie's Cafe, the kind of place with faded paint and flowers planted in old barrels. We went in and sat by the window. The waitress came over, a cheerful woman in her 50s, and poured us coffee without asking. Heading somewhere special, she asked when she noticed my nervous smile. "My grandson's graduation," I answered softly. "Well, that's wonderful," she said warmly. "You must be so proud." I forced a smile. Proud, yes, but also tired. Tired of pretending everything was fine when I was carrying so much disappointment in my heart. After she walked away, George squeezed my hand across the table. "See? Even strangers think it's right for us to be there." I nodded, but my mind went back to Marissa. I could almost hear her voice if she were sitting across from me instead of George. She would lean forward, smile that tight smile, and say, "Evelyn, don't take it personally. We just thought it might be too much for you." Too much for me. That was her favorite excuse, always delivered like concern, but meant as dismissal. Too much for me to cook a holiday meal, too much for me to travel, too much for me to be involved. Yet somehow it was never too much for us to pay tuition bills or cover emergencies. The resentment sat heavy in my chest as I picked at my sandwich. Back on the road, George hummed softly to the radio, but I stared out the window, lost in thought. I remembered the time David called, panic in his voice, because Owen was sick and they couldn't miss work. I dropped everything, drove across town, and sat by that boy's bed all night, reading to him, checking his fever, holding his hand when he couldn't sleep. Marissa never thanked me. She just said, "Well, I guess it worked out." It worked out. As if my presence, my effort, my love were nothing more than a temporary fix. And now, after all of that, she had the nerve to suggest there wasn't space for me at the one moment that mattered most. I clenched my hands in my lap, nails digging into my palms. It wasn't anger that filled me, not really. It was something quieter, heavier. A deep sorrow at being invisible in a story I had helped write. We stopped again at a roadside motel to stretch our legs and use the restroom. As I walked through the lobby, I caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror above the reception desk. For a moment, I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her shoulders were hunched, her eyes tired, her expression cautious, as if she had been told too many times to step aside. I straightened, forcing my shoulders back. I wasn't just anyone. I was Owen's grandmother. I had every right to see him walk across that stage. George noticed my reflection too and gave me a little nod. "That's the woman Owen knows," he whispered. I smiled faintly. He always seemed to know when I needed reminding. The last hour of the drive was quiet. We passed through a small town, its streets lined with American flags for the upcoming holiday. Families walked together, kids ran with ice cream cones, and I couldn't help but think about how much of my own family life had been spent trying to keep things together, to keep people connected, to keep love alive even when it wasn't returned. George broke the silence. "Do you remember when Owen learned to ride his bike?" I laughed softly. How could I forget? He fell 3 times and scraped both knees, but he kept saying, "I can do it, Grandma." And who was running beside him the whole time? George asked with a grin. "You were," I said. And when he finally got it, he shouted, "Grandpa, look at me." We both laughed, the sound easing the weight in the car. That memory reminded me of something important. Owen had always looked to us. Not just for the big moments, but for the small ones too. He had always known we were there. And maybe, just maybe, he still knew it now. By the time we reached the city where the graduation would take place, the sun was high and the streets were crowded with cars. We checked into a small motel not far from the academy. The room was plain: 2 beds, a desk, a lamp that flickered a little when we turned it on, but it would do. I sat on the edge of the bed, my suitcase still closed, and took a deep breath. "George," I said quietly, "what if tomorrow she ignores us? What if David pretends we're not even there?" He sat beside me, resting his hand on mine. "Then we'll sit together, and we'll clap for Owen louder than anyone else. Because this day is about him, not them." His words settled over me like a blanket. For the first time all day, I felt steady. That night, I lay awake listening to the hum of the air conditioner. My thoughts circled back, as they always did, to Marissa's message. But this time, instead of feeling crushed, I felt something different: resolve. Yes, she had tried to push us aside. Yes, David had allowed it. But Owen had never asked us to step away. He had never said we weren't wanted. Tomorrow, when he looked out into that crowd, I wanted him to see us. To know that his grandparents had shown up just as they always had. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough. The morning of Owen's graduation, I dressed slowly, my hands trembling as I buttoned my blouse. It wasn't just nerves, it was the weight of knowing what kind of day this would be. George stood behind me in the mirror, straightening his tie. "We'll be fine," he said gently. I wanted to believe him, but the truth was I already felt like an outsider walking into a room where I had once belonged. The academy's auditorium was packed. Rows of proud families filled the seats, holding cameras, waving programs. The air buzzed with excitement. But the moment I spotted David and Marissa in the front section, a familiar wave of resentment washed over me. They hadn't even saved us 2 chairs. We approached, hoping for a glance, a smile, a small gesture that said, "Yes, you belong here." Instead, Marissa turned her head, whispered something into David's ear, and both of them looked away. Not even a nod. An usher directed us to the far side of the auditorium, several rows back. I could see Marissa's posture straightening as we walked past, as if she wanted everyone to notice the separation. To anyone else, it looked like nothing. To me, it felt like exile. I sat down, clutching the program in my lap, trying to steady my breathing. George placed a hand on mine. "We're here," he whispered. "That's what matters." Still, I couldn't stop the flood of memories. Every word Marissa had ever spoken to make me feel small replayed in my head. "Don't worry, Evelyn, we've got it handled. It might be too much for you. You really don't need to get involved." And now, the ultimate insult, being treated like strangers at the most important moment of the boy we helped raise. The ceremony began with the principal's welcome speech. Families clapped and cheered. I tried to listen, but my mind wandered back to the years when Owen was little. I remembered one winter when David and Marissa took a vacation and left Owen with us for a week. He had the flu, and I sat up every night checking his fever, wiping his forehead with a cool cloth. Marissa called once, maybe twice, more worried about her travel itinerary than her son's health. And when she came back, she said, "Thanks, Evelyn. Hope it wasn't too much trouble." Too much trouble. That phrase still stung. And now here I was, sitting rows away while she enjoyed the spotlight. As name after name was called, parents clapped and waved, some even shouting out encouragement. I felt invisible, lost in the sea of noise. Then Owen's name rang out. My heart leapt as he stepped across the stage in his cap and gown, taller than I remembered, his face glowing with pride. My hands shot together in applause, louder than I thought possible. George whistled softly, and for a moment, I forgot the sting of being pushed aside. But then I saw David and Marissa, standing tall in the front row, clapping with rehearsed smiles as if they had been the ones who carried him through late nights of studying, through scraped knees, through every little crisis. The unfairness hit me so hard I nearly lost my breath. I paid for everything, but they still asked me to leave. It was an old thought, but now it felt fresh. We had helped with tuition when they came up short, bought books when Marissa said the budget was too tight, and even covered Owen's first semester housing. And still, they dared to act as if our presence was an inconvenience. Halfway through the ceremony, an announcement came. Owen had been chosen as a student speaker. My heart skipped. This was unexpected. He walked to the podium, adjusted the microphone, and scanned the crowd. His voice was steady at first, thanking his teachers, his classmates, and the academy. Then his tone shifted. "I want to thank the people who made this possible," he said. "The people who showed up for me, no matter what." My breath caught. This reminded me of the day my father told me he couldn't come to my middle school play. He said work was too important. I cried that night, thinking I wasn't worth the time. But then my grandparents showed up with flowers. They were always there. Always. And they never made me feel like I was too much trouble. I froze, my eyes filling with tears. Around me, people turned, trying to see who he was talking about. George squeezed my hand until my knuckles ached. Owen's voice grew stronger. "Grandma and Grandpa, this is for you. Every late-night study session, every ride to practice, every meal you made for me when I needed it most. I wouldn't be here without you." The audience erupted in applause. I felt the sound wash over me like a wave, filling the empty spaces Marissa's words had carved out. I glanced at the front row. David's face was pale, his smile frozen. Marissa's jaw was tight, her eyes fixed straight ahead, refusing to look back at us. For once, they were the ones humiliated, not me. In that moment, something shifted inside me. I could have yelled, could have let years of resentment pour out, but I chose silence. Not silence of defeat, but silence of strength. Owen had spoken for us, louder than I ever could. It wasn't revenge in the way some people might think. It was recognition, the kind that can't be taken away. As Owen finished his speech, I realized I no longer cared where I was seated. What mattered was that he saw us. He had always seen us. The rest of the ceremony passed in a blur. I clapped for every name, but my eyes kept returning to Owen, sitting tall, shoulders squared, proud of the words he had spoken. When the ceremony ended, families surged forward with cameras and flowers. George and I stayed seated for a moment, letting the crowd thin. I didn't want to fight for space. I didn't need to. Still, resentment flickered as I watched Marissa throw her arms around Owen, pressing her cheek against his gown as if she had been the one to carry him here. David snapped photos, smiling wide for anyone who looked. But the audience had heard the truth. They had heard Owen's words. And in their applause, I felt the justice that had been denied to me for so many years. Finally, Owen spotted us. His face broke into the same wide smile he had as a boy when he saw me waiting after school. "Grandma, Grandpa," he shouted, pushing through the crowd. The sound of his voice cut through everything, through Marissa's fake smiles, through David's silence, through every doubt I had carried into that auditorium. He ran to us and hugged me so tightly I thought I might lose my breath. "I meant every word," he whispered. I held on to him, tears running down my cheeks. "We know, sweetheart. We know." Behind him, I saw Marissa watching, her arms crossed, her lips pressed thin. David shifted awkwardly, pretending to scroll on his phone. They couldn't stop this moment. They couldn't rewrite it. This was ours. Walking out of the auditorium, George's arm linked with mine, I felt lighter than I had in years. For once, the humiliation didn't sit on my shoulders. It was theirs to carry now. And as Owen walked beside us, tall and proud, I realized something even more important. We had done the right thing by coming. Marissa's message had been meant to erase us. Instead, it became the reason Owen stood up and spoke the truth. And that truth had set me free. When the crowd began to spill out of the auditorium, George and I stayed back for a moment. I wanted the noise to thin out before we stepped outside. The applause from Owen's speech was still ringing in my ears, but so was the silence from the front row where David and Marissa sat frozen. We finally walked out into the bright afternoon. Families gathered in clusters on the lawn, snapping photos, holding flowers, laughing, and hugging. I held George's arm tightly, trying to steady myself. That was when I saw them, David and Marissa, standing a few yards away, looking in our direction. I braced myself. Marissa moved first. She came toward us with that tight, controlled smile she always wore when she wanted to appear polite but still in charge. David trailed behind, his shoulders slightly hunched, his eyes darting between us and the ground. "Evelyn," Marissa said, her voice sweet but sharp around the edges, "we didn't expect you to sit all the way back there." The seating chart was such a mess. Her words stung. She knew exactly where we had been seated. She had seen us walk past, carrying the weight of her message like a brand on our foreheads. "There may not be a seat for you." And now she wanted to pretend it was nothing but a mix-up. I forced myself to stay calm. "We found our spot," I said quietly. "We managed." David gave a small nod. "Yeah, Mom, thanks for coming." His voice was low, almost ashamed. "Thanks for coming." As if we had been guests, not family. As if Owen's life had been shaped without our hands guiding him. I could feel resentment boiling under my skin. For years, I had let their words pass over me, swallowed the pain, told myself it was better not to stir trouble. But after what Owen had said on that stage, I couldn't keep silent anymore. Before I could answer, Owen appeared, his cap tilted, his gown wrinkled, his smile wide as he rushed toward us. He wrapped his arms around me again, holding on tight. "Grandma, Grandpa," he said breathlessly, "did you hear what I said up there?" "We heard," George said, his voice steady but thick with pride. "And we'll never forget it." Owen's joy lit something inside me. For once, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't background noise. I was recognized. Marissa stepped closer, her smile stiff. "Owen, that was a lovely speech," she said quickly. "But you know your father, and I have supported you too." Owen looked at her, his brow furrowed. "Of course, Mom. But I wanted to thank the people who were always there." Her smile faltered. For a moment, she looked like she had swallowed something sour. David cleared his throat. "What your mother means is, it wasn't necessary to bring up the past. People might get the wrong idea." The wrong idea. That was his concern. Not the truth. Not the years of absence and neglect. Just the appearance. I took a slow breath. My heart pounded, but my voice came out clear. "David, people didn't get the wrong idea. They got the truth." Owen told it as it happened. Marissa's eyes narrowed, though her smile stayed fixed. "Evelyn, please. This isn't the time for tension. Today is about Owen's success." Every word out of her mouth carried the same tone she had always used on me, polite dismissal wrapped in control. "Please step aside, Evelyn. Please don't make this about you. Please disappear so I can shine." And for the first time, I refused. "You're right," I said, my voice steady. "Today is about Owen. And we're proud of him. But I want to be clear. We won't be pushed to the edges anymore. Not at holidays. Not at birthdays. Not at graduations. We're part of this family whether you like it or not." Marissa blinked, caught off guard by the firmness in my tone. David shuffled uncomfortably, glancing at her as if waiting for her cue. "Mom," he started, but his voice trailed off. I turned to him. "David, I stayed quiet for years. I thought silence was the same as peace. But silence only erased us. And after what your son said today, I won't let that happen anymore." His face turned red. He mumbled, "I'm sorry," barely loud enough to hear. It wasn't conviction, it was avoidance. The kind of apology you give when you want to end a conversation, not make things right. Owen stepped in, his voice stronger than I expected. "Grandma's right. You both know it. If it weren't for them, I wouldn't be here today." The words landed heavy. Marissa's face tightened, David looked down, and I felt a mix of pain and pride twist in my chest. I had wanted this recognition for so long, but hearing it out loud also reminded me of every time they had dismissed us. Every birthday where we were asked to bring something simple. Every Christmas where our gifts were quietly set aside while theirs were paraded. Every dinner where our stories were cut short with a polite change of subject. Each small slight had added up, brick by brick, until we were walled out of our own family. But now the wall had cracks, and Owen had put them there. Marissa tried again, her voice tight. "Owen, we're your parents. You need to understand how that sounded. It wasn't fair." He looked at her calmly. "Fair? You didn't show up for me half the time. Grandma and Grandpa did. That's not me being unfair. That's just the truth." Silence hung in the air. Around us, families laughed and posed for pictures, but in our little circle, everything stood still. I looked at Marissa and David, and for once, I didn't feel the need to defend myself. Owen had done it for me. My resentment was still there, sharp and raw, but it was no longer a weight I carried alone. George put his arm around my shoulders, steady as ever. "We'll let you all have your photos," he said to David and Marissa. "But Owen knows where we stand, and we'll stand here proudly." We turned to walk away, and Owen followed without hesitation. He hugged us again, right there in the middle of the lawn, in full view of his parents. That embrace was stronger than any argument. It was proof that no matter how hard Marissa tried to erase us, no matter how often David let her, Owen still saw us. And he wasn't afraid to show it. As we left the academy grounds, I felt something inside me shift. For years, I had been quiet, thinking silence kept peace. But now I knew peace built on erasing yourself isn't peace at all. I didn't yell. I didn't create a scene. I didn't need to. Because standing there, with Owen's arms around us and the words of his speech echoing in my mind, I realized something simple. We had already won. The day after the graduation, George and I sat at a little pizza place Owen had chosen. It wasn't fancy. The booths were worn, the checkered floor tiles cracked in places, but it was warm and filled with the sound of laughter. Families crowded around tables, snapping photos, raising their glasses, celebrating. I looked across the table at Owen, who was sitting with his gown folded neatly on the bench beside him. His smile was wide, but I could still see the weight of yesterday's speech on his face. He had told the truth in front of everyone. That kind of honesty leaves a mark. "Grandma," he said suddenly, "I wanted to give you something." From his backpack, he pulled out a folded envelope and slid it across the table. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter, written in his neat handwriting. It read, "You two were my Rail foundation. You never gave up on me, even when others did. You believed in me when it was easier not to. I want you to know that I'll carry your love with me into everything I do. Thank you for being my true family." I couldn't stop the tears. George reached for my hand, squeezing it gently, while Owen looked at us with that mix of pride and vulnerability only a young man on the edge of adulthood can have. That letter was worth more than every holiday meal we'd been excluded from, more than every dismissive comment Marissa had thrown my way. It was proof that our sacrifices had not gone unseen. But even as I held that letter close, resentment still lingered. Because the truth was, Marissa hadn't changed. Not one bit. She hadn't spoken to us after the ceremony. She hadn't even looked us in the eye when Owen hugged us. She had stood stiffly, her arms crossed, pretending not to notice. And David, my own son, had mumbled one weak apology before stepping aside. I replayed that moment in my head again and again. "Sorry, Mom." That was all he had managed. No admission, no real regret, no acknowledgement of the years we had given. Just a whisper to ease his own discomfort. As we sat there in that pizza shop, celebrating Owen's future, part of me still carried the sting of that silence. After we finished eating, Owen excused himself to take photos with some classmates across the street. That left George and me alone at the table, the letter still resting between us. "Do you think David will ever understand?" I asked quietly. George leaned back, his eyes steady. "Maybe, but whether he does or not, we've made it clear. We're not invisible anymore." He was right, but that didn't erase the ache. I thought about all the years when I had swallowed my pride just to keep the peace. All the birthdays where we were told to just bring something simple. All the holidays where Marissa's mother was front and center while I was asked to sit on the edge of the couch, quiet as a guest. It wasn't just what was said, it was what was left unsaid. The thank yous that never came. The phone calls that were never made. The photographs we were left out of. Each silence had carved me down, little by little, until I had started to believe maybe I really didn't belong. And now, after everything, I couldn't ignore it anymore. Later that evening, back at our motel, I received a message from David. "Mom, maybe we can talk soon. Marissa feels things got out of hand yesterday." I stared at those words for a long time. Out of hand. That was how he described it? Not the years of neglect, not the open dismissal, not the public humiliation of his parents, but Owen telling the truth was what got out of hand. I showed George the message. He shook his head. Same pattern, he said. They want you quiet again. They want things back the way they were. Resentment burned hot in my chest. I typed and erased several replies before finally setting the phone down. I knew that if I answered in anger, nothing would change. But if I stayed silent, nothing would change either. So I chose something different. The next day, we invited Owen over to our home. He showed up with pizza leftovers and that same bright smile. We sat at our kitchen table, the one where I had once helped him with spelling words, and talked for hours. He told us about his plans, college applications, internships, dreams of working in science. Every word reminded me of the little boy who once asked me endless questions about the stars, the same boy Marissa had said needed to focus on practical things. At one point, Owen looked at me and said, "Grandma, you know I don't care what Mom thinks. I know who is there for me. I just hope you know that too." I nodded, tears threatening again. "I know now, sweetheart." "I do." But David never came by. Not that week. Not the week after. His silence spoke louder than any message could. It hurt, of course it did. He was my son. I had raised him, loved him, sacrificed for him too. And yet, somewhere along the way, he had chosen comfort over truth. He had chosen to let Marissa lead, even when it meant erasing us. I couldn't carry that burden anymore. I had spent too many years waiting for him to step up, to defend us, to simply see us. And I realized I might wait forever if I didn't let go. So George and I made a decision. From now on, we would focus on the people who saw our value. We would stop begging for space in places where we weren't wanted. It didn't mean we stopped loving David. It meant we stopped shrinking for him. And slowly, that choice gave me peace. A few weeks later, Owen came back with another surprise. He showed us a framed photo someone had taken during graduation. It was of him standing at the podium, speaking into the microphone, and in the corner of the shot, you could just barely see George and me in the crowd, clapping with everything we had. "I want this in your house," he said, "so you'll never forget you were part of it." I hung it in our living room the very next day, and every time I looked at it, I felt the same mix of pride and strength that I had felt when Owen's words filled that auditorium. Do I still feel resentment? Yes. When I remember Marissa's cold smile or David's weak apologies, the sting comes back. I can't erase it. But now I don't let it define me, because I have something stronger. I have Owen's truth. I have George's steady hand. I have the dignity of knowing we stood firm when it mattered. That night, after Owen left, I sat quietly by the window. The house was still, the evening light fading across the yard. I thought about everything we had endured, the dismissive words, the long silences, the attempts to make us invisible. And I thought about how far we had come. For the first time in years, I didn't feel erased. I didn't feel like an afterthought. I felt whole. I realized something simple but powerful. Age is not about weakness. It's about dignity. And if you've ever felt like you don't belong, like your presence is treated as an inconvenience, you're not alone. I won't be afraid to tell the truth anymore, even if it hurts.